Next, we're going to look at space and how space works in UI UX design. As a UI UX designer, we have limited space to work in. We are limited to the screen size of the user's device, whether that be a phone, a tablet, or even the web browser on their computer. So in this lesson, we're going to look at using space and how it can change the way your layout looks by easily changing something. And we're going to look at space in typography. I'm going to give you guys a golden rule to follow when using space in that. All right, so using space. The best way I've seen this symbolized so far is with a grid of squares. So here we have a grid of squares, and the important thing to note is through the examples I'm about to show you, it's the same content. It's just displayed differently using space. That's why it's so powerful. So we have, let's say, 20 pixels in between each of the columns and 20 pixels between each of the rows. Since these are all close together and they're evenly spaced like this, they look like they're related. So if we want to change that, we can simply add 40 spacing here in the column width. And now we have these four groups of squares that don't look related in the same way. It looks like this is a grouping, and so on and so forth for all of the four columns now. So just by changing one space value, we've completely adjusted the layout of these grids. It's still squares, but they look completely different and they're displayed differently on the screen. Final example I'm going to show you is this one right here. We have 40 pixel spacing here. So now we've created kind of a sidebar. So this might be the main content of your web page, and this is the sidebar. We've increased that spacing so that the user knows this is separate from this. So we take a look at an app real quick. Here we have a poor use of spacing. We have good space up here with the news and the icon, and good spacing in between that and all of these elements. But these articles and the author are just too cluttered together. Their space is too small. You can't tell what article is what. It just kind of all flows together. That's kind of the example of they all look related. All these things look like one thing because there's not enough space. If we simply change that slightly by changing this to 50 pixels instead of 20, you can now see that this is an article you can click on, this is another article, and so on and so forth. So you can see how just adding white space can drastically change a design, and it can even help us remove elements in our design. What I mean by that is, if you've seen this before, these underlines. These are separator lines or underlines, whatever you want to call them. And in today's time, they're becoming less and less used. If you look at the Apple App Store, for example, they don't have any separation lines. They use cards, and the information is spaced out so that you know that they're different elements. So for example, this is one article. It has an image, a title, and the user who it's by. Then it has a separation line so that you know that this is the next article and title. But here's where this is no longer needed. When we first started app design a long time ago, and everyone was just now starting to use these devices, we didn't really know that these were two separate elements because this was new to us. But now that it is familiar, we don't need this anymore. We can simply remove the line and use space to separate it out. Because people are used to seeing a layout like this now, they know that this is an article and that's the author and title, but this is another article now. It's because of that familiarity we can now remove that and instead use space instead of an extra element like an underline or a separator line. Lastly, the thing I want to cover is using space with typography. So using space in typography is pretty simple. I like to follow one main rule, and that's taking the height of my heading, dividing that by 2, which in this case gives me 12, and using that as the space in between the bottom of the heading and the top of my body text. Every time, works flawlessly. This is a great way to start, and it will always help you keep your typography looking consistent. So to review, space can change a lot in the looks of your design. A simple layout can be adjusted with just a few pixels, so you want to make sure you're keeping everything consistent. If you're using 20 pixels between a heading and the body text, you want to make sure you do that throughout the design. There should be no need to change it from 20 to 80 in the same design. You want to start setting these guidelines for yourself, kind of creating style guides with space. So you want to make sure you keep everything looking good and consistent. And lastly, you just want to make sure that there's a need for the element taking up that space. So when you're designing, don't just be sticking things in there because you have the extra room. White space can be a good thing. So make sure you're not just shoving elements in that don't need to be there, such as an unnecessary underline or extra icons. If the app doesn't need that functionality, there's no reason to make it more complex. So that is it for space. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next lesson.